Hello there and welcome to the Card Grotto. Today I'm creating a card with an Eclipse sentiment and also using some of my favourite Copic colour combinations. So to start off with, I'm going to stamp my images. This is the Mama Elephant Fly With Me stamp set. And I'm also using the Mama Elephant Big Happy Birthday die, and that went straight for my magnet here in my mini MISTI. So just removing that first, and then I can place my sentiment die down where it's actually going to cut when I eventually cut it. And then I can place my images on top. So this is going to help me figure out where I want the placement of my stamped images to be. So I can place them down, and once I'm happy with the placement, I can close the MISTI door. And then I can just remove that die, and then I can stamp my images down onto some white cardstock. And I'm using Memento Tuxedo black ink for this. This is a Copic friendly ink, so it's going to work really nicely when I'm colouring in my images. So just placing the magnet back there in the mini MISTI, and then I can stamp those down. And at this point I realised that my cardstock was hanging out of the edge of the MISTI. Thankfully, because that magnet was in place, I could keep them there, and then I could just double stamp it so that I get a bit of a better coverage of the ink. And then I've stamped them again onto some mask paper, and I'm going to take the backing off of the mask paper, and then I can place that down onto my panel. I want to do some ink blending in the background, so I want to make sure that the elephants and the balloons are completely covered up so that I can colour them later. And when I'm making masks, I do try and cut on the line rather than outside of the line, and that helps to prevent any ghosting. So I'm just using some removable adhesive here just to stick that down onto my work surface. This is a glass mat. I just want to make sure that that's not going to move while I'm ink blending, but I don't want to add any tape onto the top because I'm going to cover the entire area with the ink blending. This is the MFT cloud stencil, and I'm just going to place that down with some post-it tape. And then I'm going to use some distress inks for my clouds. So this first colour here is Mermaid Lagoon. It's one of my favourites from the distress line. I love all of the blue colours actually, but this is definitely one of my favourites. And I'm using a blending brush here. And I'm going to start on the stencil itself, and then move the brush upwards so that I get a nice smooth blend, and it's going to be lighter at the top and a bit darker where that stencil is there at the bottom. And I tend to just dab off the excess ink onto a scrap piece of paper. It does waste a little bit of the ink, but I find that I get a smoother blend if I do it that way. So next I'm going to change the placement of my stencil. I really love this stencil because it's got the 4 different edges here, and I can just rotate them and change the edge each time I go down. Stick that back down with some post-it tape and then ink blend again. And I find that these blending brushes work really nicely if you want a lighter coverage of the ink. I do use the Ranger ink blending tool still quite a lot, but I find that I'm using these blending brushes quite a bit as well, and like I said, it gives a nice smooth, a bit of a lighter look. So my next colour here is the Blueprint Sketch, again one of my favourites in the distress line. This is more of a true blue, I suppose, and I think it's got a bit of purple in it. I do find it a really pretty colour. Again, just starting on the stencil and then moving upwards, rotating that stencil, and then I can hold it back down with the post-it tape. And then for some reason I decided that I was only going to do 2 clouds with this colour. I don't know why, because there was enough space for me to do 3, but for some reason I moved on to my next colour. And this here is the Chipped Sapphire. This is a bit more of a navy blue, but again I think it has got a bit of purple in it. I guess it depends on how you use it and which colours you kind of combine with it to what colour it turns out to be. In this case I think it turned out to be more of a navy blue. So again, just rotating that cloud stencil as I go and adding the ink on top. And then I'm going to finish up by adding a bit of ink just right at the bottom of the panel, just because I don't want it to be completely white, and that kind of finishes off those clouds. Next, I can do my favourite bit, and that is remove the masks. And you can kind of see your nice crisp white images underneath. I don't know why, I just absolutely love removing masks. So just using some tweezers there to help me out. And then I'm going to colour my images with Copic markers. So I'm going to use some warm greys here for the elephants themselves. I really love warm greys for critters in particular. Like the name suggests, I think it just gives it some nice warmth. And in my first video that I did when I shared some of my first lot of Copic colour combinations, I did use warm greys then as well. I'm not 100% sure of the exact colours that I used, but I do really love all of the warm greys, and this kind of set of colours is one that I've been using a lot lately. It just depends on how dark I want the critter to be or how light I want the critter to be. So my first colour there was the W7, and then I'm going in here with the W5. I'm thinking that my light source is kind of towards the upper left hand side, so I want my shadows to be on the right hand side, and especially at the bottom as well. So just going in with that W5 and blending out the W7. And then I'm going in here with the W4. Quite often I skip some colours, but I think these warm greys, I think they work really nicely if you kind of leave all of the colours in if you have them. If you don't have them, you can definitely skip a few, and I think again it still works out really nicely. So this is that W4. I'm going over what I've already coloured in and moving that colour towards the left hand side. And for some reason I kept dropping my Copic markers when I was colouring this in, and I kept opening the end with the chisel end instead of the brush end and all sorts of things, but never mind. So this is the W3, and I'm just blending that out. Again, going more towards the left hand side. And then this is the W2. And then I completely forgot that I didn't colour in the bottom of the elephant's foot. So I'm using the W3, the W2 and then the W1 for that. And then I can use that W1 just to colour in the rest of the elephant here. And I'm using some Memo tape there just to protect my fingers, or technically just to protect the panel from my fingers. I don't want to create any fingerprints in my ink blending there. So I covered the ears with the W1, and then I'm going in here with the R00 and the R000 just to add a bit of pink into those ears. And then I've coloured the top elephant exactly the same way, and I used the exact same shades of the warm grey. And here I'm going to colour this balloon with my favourite pink colour combination. So this is the R85, the R83 and the R81. I think this is a really nice colour combination. I think that they all blend really nicely together. So I'm using the R85 here just to add that darkest shade on the right hand side. And ordinarily I don't usually have both of my caps open on my Copic marker while I'm using it, but I overfilled that Copic marker and I don't want it to blob all over my stamped image here, so that helps sometimes if you overfill it, just to release both ends and it releases the pressure inside of the marker. So that was the R83. And then this here is the R81, and there is quite a difference between the R83 and the R81, so I'm just going to go over this quite a few times just to blend those out. I do find that it mottles some of the darker colour, so I'm going to go back in here with the R83 just to add a bit more of that darker colour there on the right hand side, and then go back in with the R81 to blend that out again. I think this is a really pretty pink colour combination, kind of like a rose pink, I suppose. For the bottom balloon here that the elephant is holding, I'm going to colour that with some purple Copic markers, and again this is my favourite sort of go-to colour combination for purple. So this is the V09, the V17, the V15 and the V12. Ordinarily, I do generally colour darkest to lightest, but with the V09, I do find that because it's such a dark colour, I find it quite often difficult to blend out and get a smooth blend. So I laid down a layer of the V17 first, and then I'm going in here with the V09 on top of it, and then I can go back in with the V17 again, and that just blends that out a bit nicer than if I had just directly added that V09 on first. And then here I'm going in with the V15 and just blending those two colours together. This does take a little bit of work. I do find that although I love this colour combination, sometimes it blends really nicely and other times it's a bit of a struggle to blend. I think it obviously depends on the size of the area as well, and for some reason some days you're better at colouring than others. So this is the V12 and I'm just going over that area there. And then again, like the pink balloon, I feel that it mottled it a little bit, so I'm going back in with that V15, just adding a bit more into the darker areas. And then I can go back in with that V12 and just blend that out. Next, I'm going to cut out my die from this panel. And I want to make sure that I'm going to stick it down quite well because I've spent a long time colouring in the images and doing the ink blending, so I want to make sure that I'm not going to ruin my card at this point. So I'm going to stick that down with some temporary adhesive, and then I can run that through my die cutting machine, and then I'm just going to lift up the die here, and I think that looks quite nice on its own, but I am going to do the actual eclipse for this portion of the video. So thankfully for me, it cut out all in one go, so everything was kept inside. It's quite helpful when that happens because you want to keep all of those inside pieces because you want to add them back in. So I've taken that piece out and I'm just using some adhesive here onto the back of the panel, and I'm going to adhere it to an A2 sized white card base. So that's a finished size of 5.5 inches by 4.25 inches. And then I'm going to add some of that tape runner onto where the opening will be of that die as well, so that when I stick everything down it's a bit easier with some adhesive already on there. So I'm just sticking that panel down, and then I have cut the big happy birthday die 3 more times from some white cardstock, and I'm going to stack those up so that I get a nice dimension for the sentiment. So although there is adhesive on that card base, I do want to add some extra adhesive onto these die cut words because they're not intricate, but I want to make sure that they stick down really well. So I'm just adding some Nuvo Deluxe adhesive onto the back of that, and then I can stick that down, and this kind of fits in a bit like a puzzle because you've got the cardstock already there and this is going in at the same height. You can kind of butt it up against the panel that's already there, and so it fits in really quite nicely. And I'm just using acrylic block here just to help me stick that down, and then I can place that down over the top while the glue dries. And then I'm going to take out all of the inside portions of the letters here, and then I can stick them down on the insides of the image. And again, this kind of works out like a jigsaw. It's actually quite therapeutic, I find, just sticking all of those pieces back inside. And it's quite nice because you can see your image come back to life really. And I can just use the adhesive that's on that card base for this because they stick down quite well. And you could just leave it like this, and if you did like a flower or something like that, or you know, kind of a more of a background, you could definitely keep it like this, and this would be a traditional inlay. But obviously I want my elephant to come back to life, so I'm going to add the other image on top so that it becomes a whole image again. But like I said, I want some dimension on that sentiment first. So I'm going to stack up these white die cut sentiments. So just added some more glue onto the back of that, and then I can stick that down, and then I'm going to do the same for the next one. So that's 3 layers of white, and then the image panel is going to be on top. And I'm just using that acrylic block there just to keep that in place while I'm sticking the glue down, and so it helps just to adhere that glue and make sure that everything lays flat. And then this here is my image panel piece, the one that I cut from the image panel. So just adding some more glue onto the back of that. And then when I stick that down, it's going to complete the image again. So I'm going to take my time just to make sure that that is completely lined up. I want to make sure that the stamped lines are all going to line up with each other. And like I said, it becomes one whole image again. And that's the Eclipse card. So I really like this technique. You get some dimension from it, but the card is still relatively flat. Like I said, usually I tend to do this with florals, but I think it worked quite nicely with these stamped images, and I don't think that it distorts the image too much. In real life, you can definitely see that that's still an elephant, and I think it looks really, really cute. And I like the clouds in the background as well. Links to the products that I used will be in the description bar on YouTube and also over on my blog. And I will have a link here to my original video that I shared my first lot of Copic colour combinations. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.